Chapter 7, verse 22 and 23. Paul writes, "For I delight in the law of God, after the inward man." Here, Paul is just accounting for the fact that he wants to obey God. We saw in the previous verses his struggle. We saw what happened when he was trying to keep the law. We saw that he couldn't. We saw that sin is revived for him and for us when we attempt to live this life outside of Jesus Christ and what he did for us at the cross. And so he makes a quick point here, and he says, "For I delight in the law of God." After all this, 22 verses later, I want to obey God. I'm saved. I'm spirit-filled. I want to live for the Lord. And he comes and he says, after the inward man, meaning that he's saying that this is an honest feeling. This is what he feels. He wants to do this. He wants to be led by the Spirit of God, and he knows that he's born again. He knows that he's saved, and this is honest. The Spirit has brought him this zeal, just like it did for all of us at salvation. Born again, Spirit-filled, wanting to live for the Lord, wanting to serve God, to do right. But we learn in Paul's message that the cross of Christ is the means by which all blessings come from God. That the cross is the reason why we were ever reconciled to God in the first place, and the cross is the way we stay there on an ongoing basis. It's the way the Holy Spirit can continue to function in our heart and life on our behalf. And so he's saying that this is how I really feel. I really want to do these things for the Lord. And then he accounts in verse 23 by saying, "But I see another law working in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members." One thing you point out in here in this verse is that twice he talks about the members. In verse 6, we see that on a few occasions talking about the members. And really where all this begins is the sentiment that we see in James 1:5. James chapter 1, verse 15. "And when lust is conceived, starting in the heart, it brings forth sin in our thoughts, words, and deed. And when sin is finished, when it runs its course, it brings forth death, separation from God." And so the members are very important because this is ultimately where sin is carried out. Thoughts in the mind, flesh, thoughts in our speech, sin in our speech, sin in our members, acting them out. And that's what he's saying here. "But I see another law working in my members." And he's talking about the law of sin and death. "I love God," he says in verse 22. I want to serve God. I'm an apostle. I'm anointed. But I see another law working in my members. This is a very critical point to us present day. And we mentioned this in the previous videos that if Paul had this concern, what more for us if we don't understand the finished work, and much more keep our faith anchored in what Jesus did for us at the cross for our walk with God. And so he's saying, I see another law in my members. He's writing as if he's a bystander, guys, in his own body, noticing that he's starting to be a different way. I see this playing out from my body, though my will is to do and to love the Lord. Warring against the law of my mind, adding insult to injury. Now seeing the result of him not understanding the cross, he's now talking about the war that's going on in his mind, the desire, the law for willpower, wanting to get his arms around this issue. Again, now doubling up on the self that he has invested in this problem when the solution was always Jesus Christ and him crucified that we see in Romans chapter 6. That's where sin was dealt with. That's where the devil was defeated. That's where the law ends. And that's where the sin debt was paid. That's why it is ever important that we understand that finished work and keep our faith placed in it so we don't have this issue that Paul is referring to. And he's saying that warring against the law of my mind. What happens when we start seeing things go on in our life? What happens to many Christians when things don't start adding up to the stuff that they're reading? Grace, abundant life, and it's not adding up. It's because the understanding of the correct object of faith, and we'll put it that way, the correct object of faith, placing our faith in what we understand that Jesus Christ did at the cross so that the Holy Spirit has the legal right to operate in our heart and life. That's important. But without that being understood, without our faith being placed in it, we end up in a position where we're now trying to resolve this on our own with our mind. Again, our faith going further and further away from the cross and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin. That as this plays out, as that faith wanes, backsliding, wavering faith, doubt, unbelief, so on and so forth, unto the law of sin and death, now fully having dominion over that poor soul. All over again, those saved. And this is Paul's account here in this chapter. And he goes on and he finishes saying, which is in my members. Now sin has fully come to fruition in my life. Paul, the apostle, is telling us that it would happen to us and that we should be careful about this and understand that finished work and stay rooted there, because that is where victory was achieved over the indwelling power of the sin nature, along with salvation. Salvation is the greatest crown of it all, but we still have to live for God. We still have to be here until the rapture. So this is the handbook on how to walk victoriously as a Christian, and so that's important. Comments, let me know, and questions, leave your comments below. And thank you guys, and God bless.